Good morning, everyone. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square, and welcome to the weekly assignment where we talk with you about what's coming up this week on Lincoln Square, the latest headlines, and what we can all do to fight back against authoritarianism. Sam Osterhout is off today, so joining me is Jeff Timmer, senior advisor at the Lincoln Project. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Susan. Thanks for having me on. It's always great to be here.
Great. And we also have Joe Sudbay, who does State of the States on SiriusXM. Great to have you with us as well, Joe.
Well, thanks for having me, Susan. It's always fun to spend some time with you.
Great. Well, we've got some really interesting primaries coming up, but before we jump into all things election, let's talk about the fact that Donald Trump's reflecting pool vandalism case hit the skids in a Friday night news dump, and now Jeanine Pirro seems to be getting dogpiled by both Trump and Interior Secretary Doug Burgum. They're throwing her under the bus, even though the evidence didn't add up against the Olympian, who there was no evidence that he did anything. Jeff, talk to us about what's going on here and what you see happening next.
What's going on here is like the dumbest timeline that we could ever envision. We have Americans facing economic anxiety, crippling inflation, this never-ending dog walking of Donald Trump by the Iranians and Netanyahu and then the Iranians again. And he's focused on ballrooms and reflecting pools and arches. And what this really shows, Jeanine Pirro pursued this because Donald Trump wanted it pursued. He wanted the show trial. He wanted to make his incompetence an inflection point by blaming it on somebody else. It was exposed. It was shown to be complete and utter delusional nonsense, surprise to no one. And they had to drop the charges. And now Donald Trump is, circling the firing squad at Jeanine Pirro for telling the truth and not being able to completely weaponize the judicial system in a fictional fantasy case. That's what's going on.
So just going back to the beginning, because this saga has been going on since before July 4th. So Donald Trump decided that he wanted to drain the reflecting pool and paint it American flag blue in honor of our 250th birthday and his birthday. And he didn't care about the egghead scientists who tried to explain to him that that would only make the algae problem worse. When you are in a swamp like Washington, D.C., where it's often over 100 degrees at this time of year and the sun beating down will do the things that science do. Rather than admit that he could be wrong, he's for weeks has been insisting that vandals destroyed his beautiful reflecting pool. Of course, he made no error there, and he got Jeanine Pirro to rig up some charges against folks who had the nerve to dip their hands into the slimy water or just be in the very proximity of the reflecting pool. So that's where we're at. The case fell apart. Joe, do you think that Jeanine Pirro is going to be next up on the chopping block for Donald Trump, like so many women in his administration have been?
Republican operatives have been as obsequious to Donald Trump as Pirro. I mean, she has been there gung-ho. She did it on Fox News. She finally got a job. And he just threw her under the bus the other day. And it was interesting. This is one of the things I was intrigued by. First of all, I live in D.C. and, everything you said about the reflecting pool, like anyone knew. And it was these trumped up charges. They've had a very hard time at the Department of Justice in D.C., but around the country when they've brought these trumped up charges. Remember the sandwich guy? People in D.C. are like not playing their game. So I was thinking, what is Pirro doing here? Is she not wanting to risk her career, her legal career? Because at some point, we've seen in Chicago, judges are really cracking down on the Department of Justice and for their, kind of unethical behavior. What prompted Jeanine Pirro, of all people, to see the light for a change? I was really shocked by it. I figured she'd just barrel through like she has with everything else. And it was the first time I thought, is Jeanine Pirro starting to think about life after Trump and not wanting to have a Rule 11 or get sanctioned by the courts? I was like, are there people in the Department of Justice who are like, holy shit, we are going to lose our legal careers because of this guy? So, because nothing else makes sense in this. I mean, they had no case. We knew that. But the way that world operates, none of this made sense. And including the conclusion. And the only thing that was predictable is that Donald Trump was going to attack her. And I'm sure that must have stung more than anything.
Right.
Yeah, she has to watch people like Jeffrey Clark and John Eastman, and look what's happened careers.
Right. Right. And Jeff, I mean, every day it's a farce with this administration, but I mean, really the reflecting pool kind of captures the utter absurdity of this administration. Not to take away from the evil that they're doing, but I mean, as you pointed out, we have an economy that's being wrecked by tariffs, by gas prices rising because of the war in Iran. A lot of people are very, even if they wanted some change with immigration, they don't like Donald Trump's deportation agenda and people getting gunned down in the street by Border Patrol agents. There are very serious things going on. But what is Donald Trump obsessed with? With building an arch and a ballroom and a reflecting pool. I mean, literally, you couldn't write a Mad King story better than this, could you?
No, and I don't think it should come as a surprise to anyone who's paid attention these last 11 years that a one-celled organism can defeat Donald Trump in a mental chess game. But you're right. I mean, the absurdity of Trump in his "I can do no wrong." It must have been communists that put the algae in there, because now we're back to making Joe McCarthy great again with the, communists in every corner of America right now. And so, yeah, anything to distract. Let's not forget this was part of the distraction campaign. Whether it's a little war in Iran, or the reflecting pool, or to distract from Donald Trump's incompetence on the economy and whatever is in the Epstein files, that they are willing to go to the mat, willing to have Todd Blanche lie to Congress, lie to Tom Tillis and John Cornyn to get appointed, to get confirmed as Attorney General in order to keep a lid on whatever they're keeping a lid on with the Epstein files. Let's not forget that.
Right. Well, we also saw Donald Trump brag about his incredible golf game over the weekend. That was a big priority for him as well. He shot a 70. I'm sure this was a very accurate accounting of his golf game. I'm not a golfer. My dad is. That'd be a hell of a score if it were true. But again, this is what he's focused on, Joe. And how do you think this is playing for the electorate with this really important election that we have coming up?
I think it all does tied together. The golf game, which is consistent. He goes golfing just about every weekend, even as he's ranting about a war that he started and is there a deal? Is there no deal? And as prices continue to go up and as nothing seems to be getting better in this country, and it's reflecting in the polls. I mean, his approval is tanking. Last week, CNN did some polling that said 73% said he's out of touch with regular people. When you're obsessed with your golf score and you're obsessed with the reflecting pool and you're obsessed with your ballroom, you really are out of touch with the American people. And, and it's one of these things. Trump gets really ranty about issues like affordability and says gas prices aren't going down and going up and just lies to the American people. But on a daily basis, people around the country are paying more for groceries. They are paying more for utilities. They are paying more for gas. They know it. So, he can say what he wants, but people are experts in their own lives, and their lives are showing them that things are bad. And then you have, I think, a good description. There's a mad king who's freaking out about his golf game in a very, like, and dissing other people, and everyone knows he's a cheater. Like, it is, there've been books written about the fact that he's a cheater, and people have shown, but that's who he is. And this is what he cares about. And I think part of the thing is, Susan and Jeff, and I think you understand this, is in the first term, there were people around who tried to keep a lid on him and keep him from being exactly who he is. Right now, there's no lid on the guy. There's no filter. There's nothing. We are seeing the essence of who Donald Trump is. And Donald Trump cares about one person, Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, I know very few people have had the displeasure of watching Donald Trump as closely as you have for these last 11 years. I do think there's a difference, and I'm curious what you think, with how he is approaching the presidency this time versus the first time around. I feel like he was much better at tapping into people's fears and trying to get them on his side, like, oh, you're angry about the economy, here, go blame the immigrants, it's all their fault. And he was able to make a coherently evil case for what he wanted. Now it's just all about him and his legacy and his arch and his ballroom. And he says he loves inflation and affordability is a scam. He's like making no effort to appease the public at all or reach them. And I'm wondering what you think is going on. Is part of this his advanced age? Is part of it that he doesn't want us to have free and fair elections and doesn't think he'll have to face them?
Well, I think it's all of the above. They're not even making a real, even a thinly veiled attempt at governing. It's all this smash and grab cash dash. How much can Donald Trump and his allies and his idiot sons, Uday and Qusay Trump, stuff into their pockets while he is still president? And the actions that he's taken this term, especially when juxtaposed against the actions he took at the end of his last term, indicate that Donald Trump doesn't plan to leave the White House the way normal presidents do. And so I think we need to be very concerned about the North Korea style, look, Donald Trump wins the golf tournament. He is strong like 10 men, and it is the duty of all women to bear many sons in his honor. This absurd, everybody can see what's going on with the reflecting pool in his artifice complex that he has here with the ballroom and everything else. And it is juxtapose that against the Americans who are making hard choices at the grocery store and with healthcare and with filling up their cars and trying to get by and make a better life. And a lot of the people who were drawn to Donald Trump because of his populist economic message are the ones getting kicked in the teeth by his economic policies. And they're starting to realize that you don't get to 32% approval rating without hemorrhaging a lot of Republican votes. I mean, you've got gonorrhea is at 35% approval, and Donald Trump sitting there at 32 now. I mean, this is rarefied territory that he's at, and Republicans across the country who are on the ballot this fall ought to be pissing down their legs a lot more than they seem to be, because when you look at the underpinnings of this election, the currents that are going to control things over the next 93 days or whatever we have until the November election, everything is going against the Republicans, except for the actions of the Democrats in some states.
Well, that's a hell of a transition. Thank you, Jeff. Joe, you are in Maine, which is home to perhaps the most interesting Senate race in the country. I know you've already been subjected to many ads, and you know the state backwards and forwards. So tell us, should Susan Collins be concerned?
Susan Collins should be very concerned. And there was actually an article in the New York Times over the weekend that actually did a pretty good job of capturing Susan Collins and where she is. And a lot of it relates to her vote for Brett Kavanaugh for Supreme Court, which she took in 2018. And she went to the floor and did one of her speeches about how she thought about it. And she talked to him and she pondered him. And she voted for him. And she doesn't regret that vote. She doesn't regret that vote. She admits she doesn't regret that vote. She's said it repeatedly. She did win in 2020 after that vote, but Dobbs hadn't been struck down at that point, and she's being forced to answer for it. And the article in the Times was really interesting because it pointed out a couple of things that this cuts against her well-cultivated reputation for being a moderate. And I'll tell you, she has cultivated that reputation for years, and she has media who will do her work. The Maine media has been very compliant with her, and I've talked about this a lot. I know how she is because I get the stories. she'll call the reporter, she'll call the editor, she'll call the publisher. Collins Watch, there's a Substack called Collins Watch that just documented how recently a headline was changed because Collins' team called and complained about it in the Press Herald, right? So that's the kind of thing she does. She's got some lackeys in the DC media too, who will always, like I see certain reporters and I just kind of laugh. I'm like, why don't you just go work on her campaign? But the other thing that they pointed out was, in the years since she voted for Kavanaugh, she doesn't regret the vote, as she said. She's most upset about people who criticized her vote. And that's another thing about Susan Collins. She's very thin-skinned. I mean, I've had her yell at me. Like I was writing on a gay blog and she yelled at me because some of the stuff I wrote, which you should never tell someone like me you even pay attention to what I write, but thank you for that. And I think, her opponent now is Troy Jackson. Troy is from the Allagash. If you Google Allagash, Maine, you will see it is just about as far north in Maine as you can get. He's as Maine as you get. He's been in the legislature, been a state senator. And one interesting thing happened last week that I think it impacts the dynamics as well. Elon Musk said he's going to start spending a lot of money, including in Maine. And Troy already did a video about it. And this, of course, falls on last week. We saw in Minnesota, which the legislature passed a law banning nudification, through Grok and other kind of entities that will take people's photos and nudify them, including children. And they passed a law against it. And Elon Musk went into Minnesota to sue to block that law from happening. And there were several state legislators from Minnesota who did powerful, powerful press conferences. And I'm like, okay, make this part of the campaign too. This is the guy who's funding Republicans. Anyone who's getting funded by Elon Musk is getting funded by a company that does really nasty things. So I think that added some fodder. I did see, one of the ads that one of the super PACs is running tries to tie Troy Jackson to Graham Plattner because he supported him last year. And I saw the ad because I'm visiting my parents and we had to watch the Red Sox, as one does when in Maine in the summer. And I saw that ad and it just felt so pathetic and weak, and it just felt so dated. Like, who cares? I don't know. And I'm very partisan, obviously, but I also like to watch ads kind of for their impact. And I was watching that one. I was like, I was bored. It was a 30-second ad, and I was bored by it. So I think that's what it's worth.
So, Jeff, you have advised so many Republican campaigns. If you were advising Susan Collins right now, how could you do so? She has managed to defy political gravity before. How can she do it this year? Or is this just an uphill battle?
Watching Susan Collins evolve the one thing about Susan Collins is she is very disciplined about being Susan Collins. She's the most
Mhm.
Susan Collins of Susan Collinses. She will continue, no matter how absurd it is, to lean into this. I'm very disappointed. I hope that he's learned his lesson, no matter what it has transpired, and how clearly that doesn't matter to Donald Trump or any of these MAGA goons. She will pretend that she's somehow powerless and not in position to do anything to stop it, which is what with such a closely divided Senate, you can really do a good job of tattooing any of these Republican senators as being the one who enables Donald Trump. And so in a smart kind of campaign, or in a normal campaign, what you would do when you have such an unpopular president would be to run against them and pretend you don't know that they exist. She has the paradox, has to suffer through this paradoxical world of Republicans where they can't do that. In 2006, when George W. Bush was in the shitter with his popularity, his job approval, even among Republicans, the White House was pragmatic enough, and they had grown-ups in the White House political shop and at the RNC who knew what candidates were doing when they were railing against I don't side with the president on this, Iraq, or whatever was going on.
Right.
It wasn't then occasion for the president and the White House to come out with all guns blazing at the Republicans. That's what's changed in the last 20 years. If Susan Collins or any candidate does that, Donald Trump and all the flying monkeys start lobbing rhetorical and social media turds at him, and they start spending real money against these candidates. And so they're kind of between the proverbial rock and a hard place. And I don't know that they can get out of it, because appeasing the MAGA base and Trump makes you do things that are kryptonite to the November voters who will decide close elections in states like Maine and Michigan. And while the narrative, especially this last month in places like Michigan or Maine with Plattner's flame out, in Michigan with the bloodbath that we have between Stevens and El Sayed, at this point, you could say it doesn't even matter who wins. There's such animosity. But what that does is forget how lackluster and historically weak the Republicans are at this point in time. And in Michigan, how weak their top of the ticket is when their governor nominee and U.S. Senate nominee and right on down. And so the breathless coverage of the DSA rise and, what's going to happen here, that to me isn't the story. Is how bad a candidate Mike Rogers is going to be, how tough of a position Susan Collins is in to defend these the tariffs, to defend the war. And Mike Rogers is out there doing it this week. He wouldn't vote with the war powers resolution. He's I'm going to give the president his room. Even if you can look at how they've dog walked Trump since February, and Mike Rogers knows it's all wrong. He knows it puts him in a tough position, but he's made the calculation that he's got to do it. And Susan Collins is just going to get out. You can go back and look at her 2020, every comment she made to camera, then just run it again. I mean, that's all they're going to do is put it on loop. It's worked in the past. It may work again. Probably not. The climate is that much worse than it was in 2020. It doesn't even compare to what this headwinds that Republicans are going to be going against in November of this year. And Susan Collins has probably run out of room to land another miraculous victory. Even with the soap opera-like flame out and replacement with Plattner with Troy Jackson, the replacement of Janet Mills with Graham Plattner, it seems like the Democrats, despite their best efforts, could still come out on top through no efforts of their own.
Well, do you think that will be the case in Michigan, regardless of who wins tomorrow, Haley Stevens or Abdul El-Sayed? Because I've covered a lot of primaries. This one is particularly nasty. and there is no love lost between the candidates, and at least with the online factions, nobody's going to be kissing and making up on Wednesday. So, there may be some work to be done there. Um, but Mike Rogers has been pretty vocal that he is eager to face off against El Sayed. He thinks he can beat him. Is that just all bluster, Jeff?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've known Mike for more than 30 years, and he is hopelessly trapped in 1994. I mean, he's running this acid washed campaign that is he reminds me of Austin Powers waking up from the deep freeze in the first movie, and after he takes the long pee, he turns around and sees all of the generals from all the world armies standing there, and he sees the Russian general standing in the middle, and he's like, oh, hey, communism. Hey, I love communism, comrade. And that's what Mike is like. He's like, MAGA. I woke up and MAGA's in charge. Hey, MAGA, I love MAGA. And it doesn't sell to the MAGA voters. They can smell the phony on Mike. Now, that doesn't, when it comes to matching up against El Sayed, I think El Sayed, regardless of all the other political issues that are going on, can he be painted as an extremist? Does his name and religion work against him? And yes, it will all be factors, but he is a gifted political athlete. He really is. You don't have to like him to recognize he's very good at this. Now, Mike Rogers, the Mike Rogers I know, doesn't have the ability anywhere near El Sayed to get on stage and deliver that kind of blow. Now, you can say, when are they going to really have that opportunity? This is going to be all, tens of millions or $100+ million spent by outside groups on TV ads and streaming ads. The one or two debates where these guys ever maybe encounter each other are going to be inconsequential. But I think that Mike Rogers is running a 1994 campaign with 1952 rhetoric, and it's with tying himself to a 32% of job approval president, who is at 22% with independent voters in Michigan. Let's not forget that. And so that's who's going to decide where Mike Rogers spends 2027 in the Senate or at his house in Florida. And I would not want to be Mike Rogers against Haley Stevens or against Abdul El Sayed in 2026. If this was a different year, I'd have a different answer.
Interesting. Well, so Joe, I have to ask you about the nightmare scenario. So let's say the Democrats are able to get to 51. They hold the Senate. Abdul El Sayed is the nominee. Then John Fetterman says, ha, I'm going to flip because I've said Israel is my end-all be-all issue, and El Sayed is firmly against Israel, so now I'm a Republican and you guys are screwed. Then what?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let's get the Democrats to 51.
Yes, true.
I want a few more. I think ideally we get to 52. I think it's so interesting. I saw John Fetterman say that, Israel's his number one issue. His wife was undocumented. Mm-hmm. He made a big play about that during the campaign. She was undocumented. She had DACA. She was a dreamer. Mm-hmm. So you're going to go to the party that is doing mass deportation. And look, I know maybe he's not being rational right now. He's being advised by people. But the other thing is, when he was in the lieutenant governor's office, he kept a pride flag and a trans flag in his office.
Right.
You're going to go work for the people. You're going to go become part of the party that wants to, I don't want to say eradicate, but really has so many horrible issues and is treating the trans community and the queer community so badly.
Yeah.
So, I imagine there'll be a strategy for how to deal with him. I think some of the people who helped get him elected owe it to us to get involved in that. But I do think the more important thing, and G. Elliott Morris does his Substack. I find Elliott just brilliant. And he today said that he did an analysis, and he's working with some of his former colleagues from 538. And I read the way that they did it, and my head hurt. It's like these like when I have reverence for geeks. This is like geeks on geek steroids, but they have done a really, really intense analysis, and they think that the chances of the Democrats taking control of the Senate are over 50% right now. So I think that's something. Like if we had said that, if I had been on your show last year, Susan, and said that, people would have been like, what is he smoking? These people are great. He's crazy. But look at where we're talking. And actually, it's reflective of what I said earlier, where Elon Musk has to spend money in Maine. I'm not sure he's going to do North Carolina, because I think that one's gone. Ohio, Iowa, Alaska, Texas, right?
Right.
Those are, I mean, that's where Republicans are worried about their candidates in those states. I think it says a lot about the state of the country right now and the way people are. And going to what Jeff said, in 2026, I think it's a different conversation. When people ask me about Michigan, you both live there, but I think there's a difference in the conversation that happens in kind of the DC bubble and what's happening on the ground. And you two are much more aware of that. When I think about Michigan, I think of it was May 5th, the primary night, and there were primaries in Indiana to see if Trump could take out some of the Republicans who voted against redistricting there, right? And that's where the national focus was. It was so intense. It's all the buzz, all the newsletters. Everyone was talking about cable news, blah, blah, blah. That same night in Michigan, Shedrick Green won that state Senate seat in Saginaw. Now, that was for control of the state Senate. So both sides understood the stakes, right? A district, Kamala Harris won by 1 point. He won by 20 points.
Yes.
And that's something we've seen around the country in special elections and the elections last November. I kind of feel like there's two conversations. There's the DC bubble trying to analyze everything and what does it mean, and imputing your great wisdom. And then there's the voters around the country who understand the assignment this year and what we're up against. So that's just my thoughts.
No, I think that's so spot on, Joe.
So, Jeff, I want to ask you about a disturbing story that's been unfolding for Republicans over the last few days involving Max Miller, his father-in-law, Bernie Moreno, Ohio's senator. Max Miller is a congressman who's up for reelection. There have been some just incredibly disturbing domestic violence allegations here. And a lot of Republicans like Jim Jordan, not surprising us, of course, are just dismissing it. They don't really consider this to be a factor. Apparently, there were allegations against Miller when he was serving in the White House as well, and the Trump administration apparently didn't do much. What does this say to you, Jeff, about the state of your former party when being accused of some of these things clearly is not a deal breaker?
Well, I mean, have we looked at Donald Trump, the first criminally convicted president, who's been found in a court to have sexually assaulted a woman, who's been accused of ties to and or covering up the Epstein files? We got Matt Gaetz and Gonzalez down in Texas, and Corey Mills in Florida, and Matt Miller in Ohio. And there's a completely different standard now in the Republican Party, where if a Democrat has issues like this, the Democrats have been quick to clean up the mess, even at political cost, whether it's Eric Swalwell or whoever, and call for them to get out, resign their office, drop their campaign. The things that would have been intolerable to both parties, to the Republican Party, certainly 10 years or so ago, are now tolerable. That's the difference. They're willing to tolerate the intolerable in order to get elected, and to take somebody like Miller in Ohio and say, Jim Jordan, to say, well, it's fine for him to serve there. And for his own father-in-law, Bernie Moreno, the father of the wife and grandfather of the child who were threatened by this Republican congressman, to wait so long and do the political calculus to before doing the right thing to protect his family shows you the kind of thuggery that rules the Republican Party, who really spent a generation talking about how character counts.
Right.
And we've seen that, that's popped like a balloon. Power counts, winning counts if you're a Republican. And this really exposes that. Regardless, now it looks like the forces are now likely to align and they're going to drive this guy out. But it's not going to be without division within the Republican Party that wouldn't have been there. It was within the last 10 years. Steve King in Iowa was defeated in his primary by the Republican campaign committee because he had said some things that were anti-gay, racist, that now look quaint in retrospect compared to what is now become mainstreamed in the Republican Party and will be celebrated and rallied around.
Joe, I know you have covered Republicans for so many years. It seems to me that not only have we seen the dual track, we've seen the dual track here of more and more extreme members of the party ascending, but also just complete scumbags. Let's be honest. Really, this is not someone. I can't even imagine my daughter being involved with someone like that. And yet there's a political calculus that Bernie Moreno has to make. Could I lose my Senate seat if I speak up for my daughter? Where are we at, Joe?
Right. And Moreno just looks so weak and pathetic here. And Miller's been texting him. Mike Signorelli, my colleague at SiriusXM, wrote about it last week, texting him this, if you keep this up, people are going to know more about you than your wife does. Like, okay. It's vile. They're vile people and they protect each other. You talk about Jim Jordan. I say, if you're wondering about Jim Jordan covering up sexual abuse, watch the HBO documentary, Surviving Ohio State. He's featured in it, and he shouldn't be, with Dr. Richard Strauss, who sexually abused people at OSU, while Jim Jordan was their assistant wrestling coach. So there's this history, and I feel like they think Trump got away with it. We all can. We are all immune from it, and we have his Teflon. And that's not true. I think another classic example of how corrupt and sleazy Republicans are is the nominee for Senate in Texas, Ken Paxton. He was indicted on security fraud. During his impeachment trial, his then wife was a state senator. She couldn't vote, but they discussed one of his affairs. But that wasn't the affair that's most recently that she's divorcing him on for biblical reasons. And it's one of these things that, I don't care what you do in your private life. Ken Paxton has made a career of, trying to end my marriage rights and end the rights of women and take away reproductive rights. That's what he does. That's what they do. And that's one of the things that just gets me the most is they're so sanctimonious and they're the Christian party and blah, blah, blah. And then there's a bunch of sleazebags. And this Miller story has been out for a while. He was dating Stephanie Grisham, who was a White House aide, and she accused him of some of domestic violence. Trump still endorsed him. And when people dug into his record, he has a history of this. I have a friend who is from Ohio who used to go to social events when his kids were kids, they wouldn't get near Max Miller. I know this sounds kind of far-fetched, but he's been that guy since he was a kid, and he's gotten away with it. And he found people who would protect him, like Donald Trump. And it sounds like he's trying to blackmail Bernie Moreno. Bernie Moreno finally issued a statement like it's some act of courage to defend your daughter from domestic abuse. Where are we? But I just feel like this, one thing about Miller's race, I think they'd have until Wednesday to replace him on the ballot. And I don't know if that's going to happen because Trump last night said it's just accusations. But that was a district that Trump won by like 57%. Miller, I think, got 51.1% in 2024. And Dennis Kucinich was on the ballot as an independent. So there was between the Democrats and
Dennis.
Democrats got about 49% in 2024, which was not a great year in Ohio. So I think his seat is very much in play. And the thing that it comes down to, Republicans want to keep that seat because they want to keep power. And Donald Trump wants to keep power because Donald Trump fears accountability, because Donald Trump knows accountability is coming.
Absolutely. Well, Joe, I say this every time we talk, but we've got to keep talking throughout this midterm season, because I know that you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on the ground in so many states, especially Maine. So thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Always great. Can I just say there's ballot measures. Michigan's not the only state. There's some really important ballot measures tomorrow in Missouri and in Kansas. So if you're in those states, make sure you're looking up what's going on and vote on. Missouri, they're trying to make it harder for people to do ballot measures because progressive ballot measures pass. And in Kansas, they're an idea generated by another one of the Republican sleazebags, Chris Kobach. They're trying to really take control of the state Supreme Court. So pay attention to those.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. Well, we're just going to quickly let you know what's going on Lincoln Square this week. Coming up at 2 today, we will have Juliet Jeske from Decoding Fox News on with Frank Figliuzzi. Probably a few things to talk about there. She has the unfortunate job of watching Fox News all day long and telling us what their messaging is. Then on Wednesday, Neera Tanden from the Center for American Progress will be on 6 Questions with Stephen Beschloss. They will be talking about the Democratic primary season, the affordability issues that CAP is working on. Also, Jill Wine-Banks, who is a former U.S. General Counsel of the Army, who now does the Sisters-in-Law podcast, which is fabulous, with Bart McQuaid, University of Michigan professor. She'll be on with Frank Figliuzzi on his Wednesday show. And then kind of putting a bow on some of the primaries that we'll be seeing tomorrow, I've got Amy Parnas, who's a political reporter from The Hill, and she'll be on with me on First Draft on Wednesday at 11. So lots of good stuff coming up, but it's always a good week on Lincoln Square when I can talk with you, Jeff.
Well, I'm glad to be here, glad to have this conversation. And it's really strange to me to think that the math for the Democrats to take the U.S. Senate can happen even if they lose Michigan. Which
that is incredible.
A couple of months ago, that wasn't even a thought in anybody's head. But now you can draw a very plausible path to majority, more than 51 without Michigan.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the odds for like the Alaska U.S. Senate race, and it's tilted just in favor of Democrats, which is pretty incredible. But I mean, Maria Patola is a very good candidate. She also posts lots of bear videos, which is one of the reasons why I like her. But she definitely seems to be an outstanding candidate for the state.
Absolutely. They're in Ohio and Iowa and even in Nebraska and Texas, the Republicans are kind of had their back up against the wall in these U.S. Senate seats.
Yeah, it was fascinating. We had Matthew Dowd on from the Lincoln Project last week with Joe Trippi on the strategy session. And Matthew, who has spent more time in Texas doing politics than, most anyone either of us know, he's convinced that Tallarico has it in Texas, and that's not just a random, opinion from some guy on the internet. So if Matthew thinks it's possible, I would feel very nervous if I were a Republican.
Yep. But I do think that El Sayed or Haley Stevens is going to be in strong position to beat Mike Rogers in Michigan. But it's no longer an existential seat on the Democrats' chessboard. That's the reason I bring it up.
which helps, which definitely helps. I mean, what is the grand question that any political strategist asks theirself in an election year? Would you rather be us or them? And
Yeah.
for this election, it's very clear that you would rather be the Democrats.
100%.
Yeah. Well, before we let all of you go, your weekly assignment is one that you've seen before, but it is crunch time. It looks like some of the Republicans are ready to fold on Todd Blanche, but it's up to all of us to let our senators know that we are watching. We're watching how they vote, no matter if your senator is a Democrat or a Republican, and let them know that Todd Blanche has no business being Attorney General for Donald Trump. And so if you want to call your senator, here you go on the switchboard. And also we will give you a very handy link in this show write-up so that you can write your senator directly. But Jeff, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. I know you've got a lot to do the day before the Michigan primaries, so I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Susan. Look forward to being back once this is all over.
Yes, I think we are all looking forward to tomorrow being over. Thank you.